against some of this a little bit with his this so-called GNC idea, right? And it also relates back to a conversation I had with Paul Gottfried a couple of weeks ago about the origins of woke, right? Now, to me, what a liberalism that is more consistent with itself, that is more truly liberal, is actually MAGA, right? The end point of liberalism is the MAGA rally where where basically the great unwashed plebs in their red caps, black, white, straight, gay, trannies, all of them together, right? Dancing to Village People, cheering on as their hero Trump comes on the stage, right? Who is a man who's had, several divorces, who is kind of a little bit kind of as anything goes in his, he's does a bit of banter and so on. He's, he shoots from the hip. And he kind of, to me, represents something truer to the liberalism that we grew up with, to the liberalism that I grew up with, of, the America of South Park, the America of Jerry Springer, the America of bloody pro wrestling, and all of the other thing that we grew up with, seems to me to be embodied in what MAGA is, right? Which is, let me make no two bones about this now, the most pro-black, most pro-gay, most democratic, egalitarian movement that America's ever seen. Genuinely. I believe that, okay? Don't believe the press's lies, because I truly believe that if we got together a group of the leading populist YouTubers, Mike, right? And me and you sat down with them on a panel for 3 hours and went through like ABCs, I reckon they'd be screeching at us as badly as any SJW. They wouldn't accept our stuff on race. They wouldn't accept our stuff
absolutely.
On, I think we would trigger them almost more than we trigger, a wokester who is already, who comes into the conversation thinking that somebody like me is a fascist already, right?
Yeah.
Now, so that being the case, the question is, what is woke then? Is woke, if you accept my premise that the end point of liberalism looks more like Trump, in my idea, woke is either an aberration, which hence how it can be put away, or it is a subversion from some non-liberal group. And I pointed this out on Twitter. And one of my least favorite things in the world, by the way, is intellectual genealogy, right? Where you say, you pick up a copy of Judith Butler's Gender Trouble, and you were like, if it wasn't for Jean-Jacques Rousseau, this book would never exist, right? I hate that sort of thing. It's always rubbish. It's always rubbish. It's like, if there hadn't been Nietzsche, we wouldn't have had Michel Foucault. You know that sort of thing. I hate that
right
sort of intellectual genealogy. It's almost always rubbish. But knowing that material as I do, it seems to me that the entire edifice of what is called woke today, first, I argue it is not contra some of my buddies like Sargon and James Lindsay and people like that. It is not downstream of French postmodern theory, right? It's like, Jacques Derrida, therefore bloody BLM. It's just not the case. For me, it is something born in America, something that is downstream of civil rights, right, and people like Martin Luther King, and the law that was put on the books, and it comes out of literally Harvard legal schools. And true to Pareto, I believe its basis, what woke's basis, is in a genuine ethnic resentment, which is quite distinct from the intellectual history of liberalism. I mean, when Al Sharpton is asking for Gibbs, it has absolutely nothing to do with John Stuart Mill or Herbert Spencer or any of these people. Like, any of the forefathers of liberalism would have Al Sharpton shot and not think anything about it. So my point is that what people call woke, I think, is a direct symptom of the incentive structures of democracy and the fact that it becomes a game of parceling out Gibbs to different groups whose politics are just, my people give me more, my people give me more. To me, you understand what I'm saying, right? That all of these things, like, people now are like, oh, woke, how have we got here? Oh, it's because of liberalism. But I can imagine a liberalism that could develop in a way that doesn't have these issues. And I look at, I don't know, Singapore, or I don't know, to take your pick, Japan, isn't it? I mean, they've got some version of liberalism, but they don't have these sorts of problems because they've been able to resist some aspect of the worst excesses of democracy, where it just becomes this horrible game of minority groups just kind of trying to trump each other for little gifts from politicians, essentially. How would you respond to all of that? Sorry.
Well, I'll first say that I absolutely agree that the center right hates us maybe more than the far left does in a lot of ways. And as a symptom of this, me with my little anon Twitter account with like 700 followers, totally staying under the radar, I've never been blocked by any far left Twitter accounts that I'm aware of, but I have in fact been blocked by James Lindsay. So
yes, me too. I'm blocked by James Lindsay.
So I think that this is just a testament to what you're saying there, is that these people, we are as repugnant to them, and maybe more repugnant to them than the far left is. It's just that the far left is a bigger target and a more lucrative sort of grift, shall we say. I could call them grifters because they are. But we like Dinesh D'Souza does not like us. James Lindsay is not our friend, and he realizes that we are probably the enemy more so even than wokeness. But I think we have to make a distinction here between what liberalism is on paper, that is what it says that it is, and what it really is. And you actually you hit upon this as you were talking there, that what liberalism is, at least on paper, I would say, is something like the idea of equality, or everyone sort of like the abstract individual, like individualism, let's just say. And MAGA really does embody that. They are the purest expression of this idea in the modern world. But what liberalism is really, when you get down to it, even what's kind of underlying that, what's underlying the equality of the like classical liberalism, is resentment. And that wokeness is just a pure expression. Intersectionality is just a more purified expression. It's a more naked expression of this resentment. And this kind of goes to a point that you made in your articles, which I think it's an important point that we need to talk about, which is democracy and liberalism. What is the difference? Is there a difference?
Yes.
I see democracy as actually as a continuation of liberalism. I think that like both are, and you touched upon this in your MAGA as Kali Yuga article. I think it was that one.
Yeah.
That liberalism is an ideology, whereas democracy is a form of governance. I actually see them both as simultaneously ideologies and forms of governance. So the ideology of liberalism, going all the way back to revolutionary liberalism, is to the core of the ideology is to put the margin at the center. And the governance model of liberalism is something like minority rule plus popular sovereignty, which is totally incoherent and gives us basically parliamentarism. The ideology of democracy, when people, when the Atlantic talks about our democracy and all of these things, is really just resentment of all hierarchy, resentment of all privilege and greatness. It's basically the reign of quantity, right? And the governance model of democracy is majority rule. It's popular sovereignty plus majority rule in contradistinction to liberalism, which tries to marry popular sovereignty to minority rule. Democratic governance is basically a cloak behind which complete anarchy reigns, where nobody is in charge, and it's just basically people trying to, as Nick Land says, to paraphrase him, to eat everything and leave nothing for your enemy on the table because it could be used as a weapon against you. That's what democracy is. But I do see democracy as a development out of liberalism. So as I mentioned, liberalism's essential idea is to replace the center with the margin. And in the case of revolutionary liberalism of the English Civil War and the American Revolution, is replace tradition, or in the case of the Americans, replace our British identity with the myth of primitive freedom. And this gives us what you might call aristocratic liberalism of the Enlightenment. The aristocratic liberalism says, well, we need to replace that primitive freedom, which was at least a kind of context, with the abstract individual shorn of context. You think of something like Kant's idea of what is the Enlightenment? Well, it's freedom. It's freedom from all. He basically puts the abstract individual as the moral and the even epistemic center of the world, right? And this gives us bourgeois liberalism. And bourgeois liberalism says, well, no, we have to actually replace that individual who at least had something kind of concrete about him with propositionality, or the proposition nation, right? Which this proposition nation gives us mass democracy. And so, this is the sort of genesis of democracy from liberalism. And even that's not the end of it either. That mass democracy says we have to replace this proposition nation, which is at least about something, with the fungible voter consumer, right? Which is wokeness. And wokeness, or identity politics, or intersectionality, whatever you want to call it, is, at least where it's not racial, is the total enshrining of pure choice and appetite. It's saying, I want to be a woman today. Tomorrow I'll be an otherkin, gender elf, or whatever it is. It's just total, like, pure choice, right? Pure appetite. That's wokeness. And I don't even think wokeness is the end of this train. I think it's got another stop at least to go. Wokeness is now starting to, or at least they're trying to sort of move from pure appetite with like this radical biological inessentialism is what they're trying to replace that with. And that is, I think, transhumanism, which is the total erasure of the human altogether. That may be the next pivot after wokeness. Now, it's complicated because... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt though, Mike, but see, do you really think that wokeness has anything to do with like Kant or the Enlightenment? Or, I mean, because it seems to me that a lot of the stuff that is called woke today, especially the critical race theory, and where it gets more racial, but also some of the gender stuff as well, is coming out of a kind of radically anti-enlightenment, anti kind of modern, anti-Western critique, which, I mean, I just wonder, like, is current wokeness, and I now hearing you describe it, I actually wonder if there's a difference between the how can I call it, the kind of the progressive stack, the racial progressive stack that they've established, which is pretty much an inverse of the old imperial racial hierarchy, and some of the more, some of the sex stuff I feel is possibly not the same, right? And that there's an uneasy coalition at the moment between, what you might call proto-transhumanists, who are the true heirs of liberalism, and I could accept that, and the kind of more Bantu variant, where it's much more about the assertion of ethnic identity and ethnic rights as against your right to existence. And to me, a lot of that stuff does not seem to come out of Western thinking at all. Or if it does, it comes out of a critique or a rejection of it.
I think, actually, this is a very important point to make, which is that wokeness itself is in some sense an unstable coalition between what you're describing there as like the racial anti-hierarchy is, I think we can bring in BAP's concept of GNC here. Mm-hmm. And actually, I'm grateful that you pointed out that his concept of that, because in engaging with it, it actually kind of it brought this to the forefront of my thinking about wokeness, which is that the racial stuff kind of doesn't fit with a lot of it, although that is focused on in a lot of cases, especially in 2020 with Floyd riots and all of this stuff. And anti-Trumpism sort of bound up with all of this. But so basically this sort of like racial resentment is based on exactly the biological essentialism that the whole package of liberalism from the Enlightenment forward was trying to reject. GNC kind of doesn't fit. It sticks out. And so to the degree that wokeness is put away, I think you're going to see that put away, or at least that they're going to attempt to put that away. It's complicated because there's an ethnic dimension. There's a definite ethnic aspect to like who is pushing wokeness. That kind of doesn't fit with the rest of the package, because I mean, who is on? Who is like one of the MAGA spokespeople par excellence, but Bruce Jenner, right? That fits hand in glove with these Enlightenment ideals, basically.
Mike, just to kind of put a hypothetical here, though, and this is just a hypothetical, right? This is on the same level as imagine that you didn't have breakfast this morning, right? Just before. Right. What if Bruce Jenner and just being a little bit gay is just like who we are at this point? This is like what whites are, right? And like this is like a genuine expression of biospirit or some bullshit. And you could kind of take that. You could even go like super transhumanist, right? Just go follow Elon Musk. Now I'm a tranny with bionic arms or some bullshit. I don't know, whatever. Right. And in a way, that is pretty like Faustian man in a way that Spengler would recognize, right?
Right.
You can imagine like a kind of, like a homo phalanx of trannies with bionic arms, if you can imagine. Okay. But they're all white. I mean, I can imagine somebody like a Greg Johnson or somebody whose first concern, first and foremost, is the integrity of a specific ethnic group, European man, say, or white man, as opposed to all of this other stuff, what BAP calls GNC. And in our conversation, we've kind of hit on a distinction between the politics of BLM and, let's say, the politics of the rainbow flag, right? And there's been an attempt to try to fuse these two things together, quite literally on the flag. Now there's a triangle on the flag that represents that. But could there be a way of combating, siding with Bruce Jenner against the BLM stuff, or is that a non-goer? This is just hypothetical.
Well, that's exactly what James Lindsay is trying to do right now. That's exactly what MAGA is trying to do. It's trying to decouple the racial politics from the politics of liberation theology, basically, which has given us, with absolutely no breaks in between, this gender confusion. Basically, I really do see the Enlightenment and what we have today as kind of like bookends of exactly the same thing. There really is not any difference. The only difference is that when it began, it was kind of incoherent, and it sort of moved towards its logical conclusion. Now, the BLM stuff, the ethnic resentment and everything, that is a kind of, it sticks out. It's a bit of an aberration that's been brought in because I think in large part because of who it is that's actually benefiting from this, Enlightenment gender confusion continuum, and it doesn't quite fit together coherently, and they're having a lot of trouble with that. It's becoming a bit of a problem, but at the same time, the attempt to shoehorn these things together to really Frankenstein these heterogeneous elements together is in large part this is causing a lot of problems for the ethnic minorities that BLM is supposed to serve and so on. It's not just Africans. It's the whole package of people from the third world. They're starting to suffer as a result of being brought into conjunction with the insane gender confusion, I cut my balls off to spite my dad sort of ideology. Yeah. It's not serving them very well at all. And it's not serving, the people who are, more in the driver's seat of that very well either. It's all of them are suffering as a result of it. So it's not just it's not just a realist kind of Machiavellian move to curtail the rise of majority ethnic consciousness. I think this putting woke away, there's also a deeply self-interested dimension to it as well. It kind of doesn't fit GNC, and this is why I was happy to engage with BAP's concept here, is that it brought to light the fact that this thing kind of doesn't fit. It kind of sticks out in an analogous sense. And I'm not saying that the two are caused one by the other, but in an analogous sense to the way that postmodernism and post-structuralism doesn't really fit with the left very well, as you and I have talked about, with Vico being sort of the OG postmodernist. That does not fit very well with the ideals of the Enlightenment at all. And it's why the left has basically abandoned it. It's why it's abandoned postmodernism, and it's going to try to abandon wokeness. But I think that wokeness is so far bound up, at least in terms of association, with the whole, like everything that the regime stands for in terms of legitimacy. That's going to be a hard sell. They're going to struggle to do that, and it might actually prove fatal to them to try.
Just last thing then, when we're on the subject of hypotheticals, another thought I've had many times, and this is really something where I've considered, like, who is Elon Musk and what is he trying to do, right? What about the idea of a genuinely utilitarian, I mean, broadly speaking, little L liberal, right? But utilitarian and